I was driving home from the accountant's office with the windows down, thinking about how I'd break the news to my son, when I heard something through the kitchen screen door that made me stop walking mid-step and press myself flat against the side of the house. The meeting with Harold Kessler had lasted most of the afternoon. Harold had been managing my finances since before my wife passed. 12 years of quarterly reviews and birthday cards and the occasional lunch at the diner on Clement Street. He's good people, careful, the kind of man who double-checks everything twice and apologizes for making you wait. That Tuesday, he'd called me in not for a routine review, but to tell me that my brother Clifford, who'd lived alone on the 10-acre property outside Bozeman for the last 11 years, had died of a stroke 3 weeks prior. The estate attorneys had been trying to reach me. Clifford and I had drifted. After our mother's funeral, we'd exchanged Christmas cards for a few years, and then even that stopped. Distance and stubbornness, the Brooks family inheritance that nobody puts in a will. Clifford had put me in his, though. Harold slid the documents across the desk without ceremony, which is how he handles things that might make a man cry. The Bozeman property, 3,200 square feet of main house, plus outbuildings, last appraised at $1.4 million. A separate parcel of commercial land outside town, valued at another $800,000. Cash holdings in a trust account, roughly $340,000. Clifford had written a single line in the margin of his handwritten addendum. For Warren, who always showed up when it counted, even when I made it difficult. I had to take my glasses off and look at the ceiling for a moment. I hadn't shown up when it counted. Not toward the end. That was the truth I was still wrestling with when I pulled onto my street, rolled to a stop at the curb instead of pulling into the driveway, and cut the engine. Old habit. When the kids were teenagers, I used to park at the curb so I could watch the house for a minute before going in. A prosecutor's instinct, maybe. Or just a father's. Either way, it saved me that evening. My son has been living with me for 7 months. He and his wife moved in after what they called a temporary setback, something involving a business partnership that went sideways, debts they were vague about, and the specific way people are vague when they're ashamed. I hadn't asked too many questions. He's my son. You make room. His wife had always been polite to my face. The kind of polite that functions like a screen, pleasant surface, nothing visible behind it. The kitchen window faces the side yard. The screen door was propped open an inch, the way it gets when someone forgets to latch it. Their voices carried clearly in the still evening air. He's 68 years old, and he thinks Montana real estate is his reward for being a decent brother. My daughter-in-law's voice. Flat. Businesslike. People his age get confused about numbers, about what they can actually manage. He's not confused about anything. My son. Lower. Less certain. Not yet. But he's alone. He's isolated. He doesn't have anyone watching out for him except us. That's actually an advantage if we think about this correctly. I stood very still in the shadow of the oleander hedge. The pruning shears were still hanging on the hook right next to me. I remember looking at them and then looking away. I'm not going to do anything that hurts him. My son again. Nobody's talking about hurting him. I'm talking about being realistic. He can't manage a $2.4 million estate from a row house in San Francisco. He needs help. We can be that help. We can be the people who step in and handle this before he makes a mistake, or before someone else takes advantage of him. We'd be protecting him. A pause. The refrigerator hummed. Dr. Perkins already agreed to see him. Geriatric assessment, completely routine. If Warren's cognitive function shows any gaps at all, any hesitation, we can document it. That's all I'm saying. We document it. From there, we talk to a lawyer about whether conservatorship might be in his best interest. Conservatorship. The word landed in my chest like something thrown from a height. He'll never agree to see a doctor. He doesn't have to agree. You tell him it's a routine checkup. His blood pressure, his cholesterol. He's been complaining about fatigue. Rebook it through that clinic on Geary, the one that doesn't have a patient portal where he could look things up ahead of time. He goes in thinking it's routine, and Dr. Perkins assesses him. If the results support our position, we have documentation. If they don't, we've lost nothing. And the property? Once we have conservatorship, we make the financial decisions. We sell the Montana land, clear our debts, and manage the remainder for his care. That's a legitimate function of a conservatorship. We'd be managing his estate. I backed away from the house the way you back away from a dog that doesn't know you're afraid of it. Slow. No sudden movements. I made it back to the car, eased the door open, sat down, and looked at my hands on the wheel for a long time. I had spent 31 years as a forensic accountant for the state attorney's office. I had helped prosecute 42 financial fraud cases. I had sat across from people in interview rooms who had done to strangers exactly what I had just heard my son's wife describing, calmly in my kitchen, over what smelled like the chicken caciatore she'd been making when I left. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I started the car and drove. I didn't have a destination. I went north on Divisadero, crossed the Panhandle, ended up parked outside the Botanical Garden in Golden Gate Park. Fog was coming in off the ocean, the way it does in June, slow and purposeful. I sat there until a woman walking a pair of greyhounds glanced at me twice the way people glance at old men sitting alone in parked cars, making sure I was all right. I gave her a nod. She moved on. The prosecutor's mind doesn't retire when the career does. It just runs quieter. Sitting in that car, I let it run. What I had was an overheard conversation. Inadmissible, uncorroborated, my word against two people who would call it a misunderstanding. Call me hard of hearing. Call me exactly the kind of confused old man they intended to manufacture on paper. What I needed was evidence. Documented. Tim-stamped. Obtained legally. I knew how these cases were built. I'd built dozens of them. California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 15657. Elder Financial Abuse. Probate Code, Section 1801. Conservatorship by fraud. What they were describing wasn't caregiving. It was a crime with polished language laid over it like a coat of paint. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I trusted completely in legal matters. Gwendolyn Marsh had been a deputy DA when I was still working cases in the Financial Crimes Unit. She'd gone into private practice 8 years ago, elder law and estate litigation. I'd sent her a bottle of good bourbon when she made partner. She picked up on the third ring. Warren, it's been a while. It has. Gwen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me the way you used to hear witnesses. Not just for the facts, but for what's underneath them. A pause. Talk. I told her everything. The inheritance, the accountant's office, the parking at the curb, the screen door. Every word I'd heard. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for 4 or 5 seconds. This Dr. Perkins. Do you know anything about him? No. I'll run him tonight. Geriatric psychiatrists who agree to assess a patient for conservatorship purposes at someone else's request. For cash, they tend to have a paper trail. Complaints, licensing board reviews, prior connections to conservatorship attorneys who work volume. Her voice was level, professional, with an edge of something older underneath it. Warren, what they're describing is a well-documented pattern. It happens to people with sudden inheritances, people who are isolated, people who don't have an advocate in the room. The fact that you overheard this before it progressed is significant. I need to build a case before I confront them. If I confront them now, they adjust, they get careful, and I lose the evidence. Agreed. You need them to act. She paused again. Can you go home tonight and behave as if you heard nothing? 31 years in financial crimes. I'd sat across from people who had no idea I already knew what they'd done. Yes, I said. I can do that. Then here's what we're going to do. She talked for 20 minutes. I took notes on the back of a pharmacy receipt I found in the glove compartment. Old habit. You always write things down. California is a one-party consent state, which meant I could record any conversation I was part of legally. She had a contact at the San Francisco Elder Abuse Task Force, a detective named Obina Sarp, who'd worked several conservatorship fraud cases in the past 2 years. She would call him tonight. She also had 2 small voice-activated recording devices she kept for client consultations, discreet, professional grade, legally obtained. She could leave them at her office for me to pick up in the morning. When you get home, she said, you're a man who went to see his accountant and got some complicated news about his brother's estate. You're processing grief. That's real. Use it. It is real, I said. I know. I'm sorry about Clifford. She said it simply, without inflation. I appreciated that. I drove back to the house. Parked in the driveway this time. Went in through the front. My son was in the living room with a book open in his lap that he wasn't reading. His wife was in the kitchen. The chicken cacciara was on the stove, and she'd set the table. 3 places, a small domestic performance. She looked up when I came in, and her face arranged itself into concern. We were starting to worry. You were gone longer than expected. Harold had a lot to go over, some estate issues involving Clifford. I set my keys on the counter, the way I always set them, left corner near the fruit bowl. It's a lot to absorb. What kind of estate issues? My son's voice from the doorway. He'd come in quietly. Property mostly. I'll need some time to understand all of it. I moved to the stove, lifted the lid on the pot. This smells good. I appreciate it. We ate dinner. They asked careful questions that weren't too direct. The kind of questions you ask when you're trying to map the size of something without revealing that you already know the shape. I gave them enough. The Bozeman property. The commercial parcel. I let my voice carry the appropriate weight of a man trying to process an unexpected inheritance tied to a complicated grief. It wasn't difficult. That part was true. After dinner, my son's wife suggested I see my doctor soon, just a general checkup. Managing stress around an estate this size could be taxing. She said it with genuine-sounding warmth. I told her that was probably wise. My son watched me from across the table with an expression I couldn't read, something that might have been guilt, sitting behind something that looked like concern. I went to bed at 9:30, left my door slightly open. At 11, I heard them in the kitchen. Their voices low but carrying. I had positioned my phone on the nightstand with an app Gwendolyn had described, voice activated, capturing clearly up to 20 feet. Later, I would confirm it had recorded 42 minutes of audio. He mentioned commercial land. That's separate from the house. Has to be. Harold Kessler manages his accounts. We need to find out what's in the trust before we move forward. Dr. Perkins said he can see Warren Thursday if we can get him there. Thursday works. Tell your father his internist referred him. Routine cognitive baseline. They do it for everyone over 65 now. He won't question it if you frame it that way. What if he asks to see the referral? I'll put something together that looks plausible. It doesn't need to be perfect. He'll be in the waiting room, and then in the exam room, and by the time anything seems off, he'll already be documented. I lay in the dark listening to my son say nothing in response to this for a long time. Then, what's our exposure if this doesn't work? Minimal. Concerned family members seeking a cognitive assessment for an elderly parent isn't criminal. We haven't done anything yet. We haven't done anything yet, he repeated. Thursday, she said. Let's just get through Thursday. I forwarded the audio file to Gwendolyn at 11:52. Her response came back in 11 minutes, sending to SARP tonight. Pick up the recorders at 8 a.m. Don't let them see you nervous. I wasn't nervous. I was something else. Tired, maybe, in the specific way that comes when something you'd hoped wasn't true turns out to be exactly as bad as it looked. Clifford's note came back to me in the dark. Who always showed up when it counted. He'd believe that about me. I wasn't sure it was true, but I intended to make it true now, for whatever that was worth. I barely slept. When the light came, I lay still and listened to the house. At 8:15, I told my son I was going to pick up a prescription at the pharmacy on 24th, that I might stop at the park after, that I'd be back by noon. He offered to come with me. I told him I wanted the air. He accepted this with a nod that had something apologetic in it, though he said nothing that would explain the apology. Gwendolyn's office was in the Embarcadero Center, 17th floor, view of the bay. She met me in the lobby. Small woman, sharp eyes, silver-streaked hair she'd stopped coloring somewhere in her 50s. She handed me a cloth bag with 2 recording devices inside, each no larger than a key fob, one clipped to the inside of a jacket lapel. The second could be placed on a shelf, or tucked into a plant, or set behind a lamp. Both transmitted to an encrypted app on my phone. Obina Sarp wants to meet you this afternoon, she said. He's been building a file on Dr. Perkins for 14 months. Perkins has been connected to 3 conservatorship fraud cases in the Bay Area in the last 4 years. Each time a patient with a recent inheritance or significant liquid assets. Each time a family member or caregiver who stood to benefit from guardianship. 2 of the cases settled. One elderly woman lost her home before the DA's office could intervene. She paused. Perkins is careful. He's never been charged. What we're building here could change that. What does Sarp need from me? The appointment. He wants you to go to Perkins's office Thursday. They'll have surveillance on the building. When your daughter-in-law's payment changes hands, if it does, and when Perkins provides documentation recommending conservatorship, that's where we move. Active commission of fraud, bribery, conspiracy, not just planning. I understood the strategy immediately. Catching people in the middle of the act rather than arresting them for what they said in a kitchen. Defense attorneys could argue intention. They couldn't argue away a cash envelope and a signed, falsified medical document. I need to play along until Thursday, I said. You need to play along until Thursday, she confirmed. Sarp met us at a coffee shop near the Hall of Justice. Former military bearing, still visible in the way he sat, methodical in the way he talked. He'd reviewed the audio Gwendolyn had sent, and he used words like actionable and clean chain of custody and strong probable cause in ways that told me he'd been doing this work long enough to know what a solid case looked like when it came in. Mr. Tav, Branagh, he said, using my last name in a way that felt like a small formality. A professional courtesy between 2 people who understood what was at stake. What they're doing is not unique. Conservatorship fraud against elderly people with sudden inheritances is one of the fastest growing categories of elder financial abuse in California. It tends to be conducted by people who are close to the victim. People who can explain away any early suspicion. The metal component, the fake assessment, is how they manufacture legal standing. Once a court grants emergency conservatorship, the victim loses control of their finances, their medical decisions, sometimes their housing, before anyone can intervene. Reversing it can take years. I know what it looks like from the prosecution side, I said. I spent 31 years on the forensic accounting side of these cases. He looked at me for a moment. Good. Then you know why we need Thursday. I went home at noon as promised, made a sandwich, watched some baseball. My son's wife came in around 2 and mentioned, casually, that she'd spoken with my doctor's office, and they'd confirmed a referral for a cognitive baseline assessment on Thursday. Completely routine. She'd be happy to drive me. She said the clinic's name, a place on Geary I'd never heard of, and that did not appear in any directory I could locate later that evening. That's thoughtful, I said. Thursday works. She smiled and asked if I needed anything from the store. The next 2 days moved with a particular cruelty. I ate meals with them, watched television, accepted offers of tea, which I poured into the bathroom sink when no one was looking. Wednesday evening, my son sat with me on the back porch, while the fog came in, and he asked me, somewhat abruptly, whether I had considered what I'd do with the Montana property. I haven't decided, I told him. I want to go out there first, see what Clifford built. That makes sense. He was quiet. Were you 2 close when you were kids? Close enough. We lost track later. I'm sorry you lost track. He said it in a way that sounded like it was about more than Clifford. I didn't respond to the layer underneath it. I wasn't ready to, and Thursday was coming. Thursday morning I dressed in slacks and a button-down. The way I dress for a medical appointment. Gave them nothing to question. My son's wife drove. My son stayed home. In the car, she made conversation about the neighborhood the clinic was in, about parking, about how these baseline assessments took only about 45 minutes, and we'd probably be done by 11. I watched the route in the side mirror. A gray Subaru had been 2 cars back since we left the house. Sarp's team. The steadiness I felt knowing they were there was the same steadiness I used to feel walking into a deposition with a full file of evidence in front of me. The clinic occupied the 2nd floor of a building that had a payday loan office and a notary on the 1st, no directory listing at the entrance. A receptionist who seemed to know my daughter-in-law. A brief exchange, then a waiting room with chairs arranged along the walls. Dr. Perkins appeared after about 10 minutes. Late 50s, careful presentation, the kind of practiced warmth that medical professionals develop when they need patients to relax. He shook my hand, asked me to come back, asked my son's wife if she'd like to wait or come in for the consultation portion at the end. She said she'd wait, and there was something in the way she said it that suggested they had already discussed this. The assessment itself was standard. Orientation questions, date and location, word recall tests, simple arithmetic, a series of pattern cards. I answered each question with the slight deliberateness of a man who is careful but competent, the performance of someone who is sharp, but whose sharpness could, with the right framing, be described as compensatory. I'd watched enough expert witnesses shade cognitive assessments in fraud cases to know exactly what the documentation would say. Perkins made careful notes throughout. At the end, he asked me how I'd been sleeping, whether I'd experienced any recent stress, whether I had support at home. I gave him the answers that fit the picture they needed. He thanked me and asked me to wait in the lobby while he spoke with my daughter-in-law. I took a seat. From where I sat, I could see the hallway door, but not into the consultation room. I counted the ceiling tiles. 17. The ficus in the corner needed water. The consultation lasted 9 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. When the door opened, my son's wife came out first. Her expression was the careful neutral of someone trying not to look satisfied. Perkins walked her to the hallway. His voice was low, but not low enough. Documentation will be ready by end of day. For the conservatorship filing, your attorney will need the assessment report and the recommendation letter. Both are standard forms. A pause. The agreed amount. The sound of an envelope, then the door behind me opened. 2 plainclothes officers I hadn't seen enter the building. Sarp came through the hallway door at the same time, badge visible. 2 uniformed officers behind him. Dr. Perkins. Don't move. His voice was very quiet. That was the part I hadn't expected. How quiet it was. No shouting, just certainty. Glennis Watson, please step away from the hallway. My daughter-in-law turned. She saw me sitting in the chair. Her face went through several arrangements before settling on something that looked like disbelief. Morin, what is this? I stood. The years fell away in a particular way, not that I felt younger, but that I felt very clearly like the person I'd spent 31 years becoming. I heard you through the kitchen screen door Monday evening, I said. I heard all of it, the clinic, the assessment, the conservatorship plan, what you intended to do with Clifford's property. I recorded the rest. I reached into my jacket pocket and set my phone on the chair beside me. California Welfare and Institutions Code 15657. Probate Code 2950. Penal Code 182. Conspiracy. Bribery of a medical professional. I looked at Perkins. You've done this before. This time, there's a chain of evidence. Sarp's officers moved professionally. The envelope was photographed where it lay on the floor, cash visible, partially fanned. Perkins asked for a lawyer in a voice that had lost all its practiced warmth. My daughter-in-law said my son's name once, quietly, like a reflex. Sarp stood beside me while they processed the scene. Your audio is solid, he said. Both nights. The recording from Thursday morning in the consultation room will be exhibits. The cash and the falsified documents give us completed acts on 3 statutes. He paused. You did good work. I had good teachers. I meant it. Gwendolyn met me outside on the sidewalk. The fog had burned off by then, which was unusual for June in San Francisco, and the light was very direct and clear. She handed me a copy of the emergency protective order she'd filed that morning Assets frozen pending investigation. Conservatorship petition permanently barred. Your estate is intact, she said. Clifford's property, the trust, all of it. I thanked her. She told me not to thank her, that this was the work, that this was what the work was for. She said it the way people say things they believe completely. The drive home was strange. My son was in the living room when I came through the front door. He stood up when he saw me, which told me Sarp's people had already called him, or possibly that he'd already seen a call from his wife. He wasn't able to answer. He looked like he had something to say, and couldn't locate it. Dad. I know, I said. I didn't. He stopped. I knew it was wrong. I knew it from the beginning. You didn't stop it. No. His voice was very low. I didn't. I set my keys in the left corner of the counter next to the fruit bowl. The kitchen smelled like the coffee she'd made this morning, which struck me as an ordinary detail in an extraordinary morning. I'm going to need you to find somewhere else to live, I said. Not because I don't love you, because I can't have this in my house. He nodded. He didn't argue. Whatever argument he'd been carrying around for the last 7 months seemed to have run out of energy. Is she? She's been arrested. Your attorney will tell you what that means for you. Gwendolyn Marsh is mine. Don't contact me about the estate or the legal proceedings. Contact me when you're ready to talk about something else. He left that afternoon. I watched him load his car from the front window. 2 trips, the second carrying a lamp I recognized from when he was in college. I'd driven it up to his dorm in a hatchback. He'd stood in the parking lot trying to figure out how to get it up 3 flights without breaking the shade. We'd laughed about something. I couldn't remember what exactly. That was a long time ago. I sat at the kitchen table and called Harold Kessler. Told him I was ready to begin processing Clifford's estate, that I'd be flying to Bozeman the following week to see the property, that I wanted to understand what my brother had built out there in 11 years of distance and stubbornness, which apparently included something worth leaving to the brother he'd stopped speaking to. Harold asked if I was all right. I'm all right, I said. Through the kitchen window, the afternoon light was coming in at the angle it comes in late June, long and flat, and very certain of itself. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 7 months. The quieter was harder than I'd expected, but underneath the hard part, somewhere below it, was something I recognized from years of closing cases. Not happiness exactly, simpler than that. The particular stillness that comes when you've done the thing that needed doing and done it correctly, and it cannot be undone. I left the keys where I always leave them and made a cup of coffee and sat with it until the light changed.